Now, the lockdown files released by The Telegraph this week have highlighted the government's betrayal of the nation at the height of the pandemic. But it looks like two of society's most vulnerable groups, our children and our elderly, were truly hung out to dry, with those who were boycotted and bullied for their brave stances during the pandemic now finally able to say, "Ha, I told you so." We hear two women's powerful stories from the front lines of Matt Hancock's dystopian lockdown Britain. And I am joined now, very glad to be joined by actress turned activist Leandra Ashton and Dr. Renee Honderkamp. Thank you very, very much. Now, Renee, we'll bring you in a moment, OK, but just before we get cracking, OK, I want you to see with me this video from Leandra, who back in November 2020 filmed heartbreaking scenes as her then 73-year-old mother was unbelievably arrested for trying to rescue her 97-year-old grandmother from a care home where she was essentially imprisoned under Hancock's lockdown rules. Watch this.
So let's just make this very clear. My nan, my 97-year-old nan here, who we have taken from the care home because we haven't seen her for 9 months, is now being taken back by force to her care home. My mother has been arrested. My mother is in the back of the car here. She is a nurse. She is a fully qualified nurse who is wishing to care for her own mother. And here we have an incredible use of police time to take my 97-year-old grandmother back into a care home where she is deteriorating, where we haven't been able to see her for 9 months. Nan, I love you and we are going to fight for you.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Leandra, your grandmother is sadly no longer with us, and very, very sorry to hear that. Do you and your mother feel vindicated by these revelations, or just full of anger?
To be honest with you, I think the anger, I have been working on letting go of the anger. It's been 3 years now. And I think we have to move beyond the anger. I have been so furious, and the revelation of these messages only confirm what so many of us knew 3 years ago. The manipulative propaganda of wear a mask for grandma when our most vulnerable citizens were dying miserably in care homes. There is nothing in these messages that surprises me. And,
for no ring of steel, by the way. For just to interrupt on that, for no ring of steel. So what we just saw there, OK, was an incredibly elderly woman, quite frail, if you don't mind me saying, being basically carted away by police, vital moments and minutes that you and your mum could have spent with her, snatched away from you, under the illusion, the total illusion, that there was a ring of steel around the care home system, that you were doing your bit by virtue of not seeing her. And that, I think, has turned out to not really be true, has it?
I think so. And I know that yesterday you had Jane Connery from Care Campaign for the Vulnerable, and we are in touch with thousands of families who are in the same situation as us. Thousands of people where the focus seemed to be on, rather than the quality of life, it was on the quantity of life. And when you're 97 years old, in the end, we got my gran out of the care home, and she had 13 months at home with my mum lovingly looking after her. We were one of the happy stories. We were one of the lucky stories. My nan died at home with my mum beside her. So many people didn't have chance to have that experience. And I think that these messages are just the tip of the iceberg, because the questions still need to be asked, which is what killed so many people in care homes? Because yes, there was COVID, and yes, there was no testing, but that is the tip of the iceberg. There's the question of the blanket do not resuscitates. There's the misuse of end-of-life medication like midazolam. This stuff is massive and needs to be looked into.
Well, let's have a little look into it now. And Renee, thank you very much. I know you've been hanging on there for a little while. This is the perfect opportunity to bring you in, because NHS GP Dr. Renee Honderkamp, you were ostracised by your medical colleagues for daring to speak out as one of the sole NHS voices against lockdown measures. I'm going to get you to react to what's just been said there about, some of the reasons behind why people actually died.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I mean, I agree entirely with Leandra. So I actually wrote about this in July 2020, that I was watching people in care homes. Obviously, they were in a care home, so they weren't, completely fit and well, but they were fit and well enough to lead, meaningful lives. And they were in care homes where they were shipping in people with COVID without testing them. So they were then trapped inside a home with COVID and very vulnerable. If they did get COVID, they're not sent to hospital, because we were told that on a frailty score, and almost everyone in a care home met that, they actually wouldn't do well enough in hospital. So they used the guidelines to say they shouldn't go into hospital and even have a hospital bed. Some of those people only needed oxygen, and that would have been enough for them to live. COVID just didn't kill people who needed to go on a ventilator. And when I actually said to somebody, to a GP in a group, well, why are you starting end-of-life medication on that 77-year-old who was well enough before? They actually laughed at me. They said, you really think he'd be okay on a ventilator? And I said, but he may not need a ventilator. He might just need oxygen. And they just mocked me like I was a child. I didn't understand. I didn't have good enough training as they did. They made me feel like I was a lunatic as I said this. And it didn't seem to matter to anyone that these old people were trapped inside what turned out to be death camps, really, because there was no way out for them. And the COVID was just coming in the front door.
And it's astonishing when we add on top of that, Leandra, that people were banging the doors down, not just of this, but also schools. They were saying children now are going to have massive mental health problems as a result of this, physical health problems as well, which we are seeing, by the way, because children in early years development didn't mix, so they didn't get, natural immunity to a lot of stuff. People are going to struggle left, right and centre with this stuff, and yet it would appear now, Leandra, that the reason really why schools weren't opened was based on quite flawed data, which the government knew about, and also Matt Hancock in some kind of, how do I put it, ego war with Gavin Williamson. So what was it all for, Leandra?
Well, I think that's a really good question, because I know within my own family there was I felt very strongly that the school should not be shut down, that we needed to protect the children as we needed to protect the elderly and vulnerable. But there was this whole question of, well, the young people are going to be passing it on to the older people. And how about, mixed houses where there are intergenerational families? But to me, that just never stacked up when you actually look at the data that now we can see being shared in those WhatsApp messages. The level of risk, as Renee just said, the level of risk for someone, even in their 80s, there was still a really good chance that they were going to survive if they were given good care and, simple treatments. So the whole scare tactics to divide society and to divide families, I think this is what we need to really work at overcoming now, is bringing everyone back together. Yes,
no, I couldn't agree more. But Renee, now, given that, time and time again, you were ostracised. Time and time again, you were saying things. And this is someone who even has medical training. When people were piping up a lot of the time saying, oh, I think it should happen, they go, oh, where's your medical degree? Well, you have one. You've got one. And they still didn't listen to you.
So then they would say, Patrick, oh, you're not a virologist, you're just a GP. Well, you know what? That virologist and me, we all had the same training underneath, and we can read data and we can actually use our logic. But, logic went out of the window. The best minds in the world stopped thinking. And I had to sit day in, day out, watching young children with speech impediments, not socialised, happy, gregarious teenagers turned into gibbering wrecks because they were locked in their homes. And this damage is going to be there for decades to come. So whilst these WhatsApps, Patrick, have been, validating for me and many people, that's not good enough, because what we need to do now is not say, look, I was right. We need to say, well, where do we go from here? What do we want from this? And I think when it comes to children and the elderly, what we need is a seat at the cabinet tables for a children minister, an elderly minister who can fight their corner. And Robert Halfon MP brought forward a private member's bill to actually make schools a protected place, an essential place of work, so they couldn't be closed. We need laws like that. And we need laws for care homes where the elderly can't be treated like animals and locked away without asking them.
One of the main things that protects elderly people, and this goes for both in the NHS in actual hospital wards and in care homes, is when they've got relatives who are with them a lot of the time who can really keep an eye on it. And what this did was mean that these poor old people were locked away on their own somewhere. And, well, it's no shock that, as they say, the rest is history. Look, both of you, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate that, coming on and sharing a couple of very moving testimonies. That was an actress turned activist, Leandra Ashton. And, of course, we've got NHS GP Dr Renee Honderkamp. Thank you very, very much. Now, on care home policy, a spokesman for Matthew Hancock said, to use his full name, said, these stolen messages have been doctored to create a false story that Matt rejected clinical advice on care home testing. This is flat wrong. I have now read that statement so many times. It's there every time I close my eyes. But